So hey everybody, good to see y'all. Thanks for coming. Thanks for having your cameras turned on and your mics ready to be unmuted and ready to join in our discussion today. This is the fifth in the series that we're calling Reframing Resilience, and it's been a great partnership between Global Atlanta and Pendleton as we've put together these discussions about how we're dealing with the new realities of COVID-19 and beyond. And we've had some industry focused things and some very interesting conversations about trade and exports and foreign investment and all kinds of things. And this one today, we're kind of looking at the balance between surveillance, security, and smart cities, the implementation of new technologies in the smart city realm. Most of you, I think, have participated before, so I don't have to do too much explanation in that regard, but basically, we're going to encourage you to join in the conversation. We have our three featured speakers, whom I'll introduce in a moment, but we want to make sure that you participate as well and add your expertise to the conversation. So I am going to turn it over right now to Guy, just for a few notes on that, and we'll get going here very shortly.
Yeah, I'll say a few words on the format and what we do, then Jorge a few sentences on Pendleton Group, and then we'll take it from there. Not a lot, and many of you have already participated in one of these conversations, and the idea is to kind of emulate what would have happened in real life, where we have issues, real life issues, not hypotheticals or things that may happen, but real life issues that I guess require a conversation and find what people are doing with that, what actually the problems are, and how we individually and as a group set up to resolve it and help each other in the process of doing that. And I think that today's topic is a great example of this attitude, because this is something that on one hand we're very excited about, technology and smart cities, etc. But there's a lot of issues that can and may arise as a result. So I'll give Jorge a few seconds to talk about Pendleton, and then we'll bring it back to Trevor and start the conversation.
Thanks, Guy. I'm Jorge Fernandez from the Pendleton Group. Here we partner with Guy, also from the Pendleton Group. And I want to thank you for spending part of the morning together, having this great conversation about resiliency, because this is what it's all about. In this particular case, talking about the intersection of smart cities and surveillance and privacy and what to do with the data that all these devices collect and avoid what's happening in some of the cities. But what is really exciting too is beyond just talking about this, it's about highlighting the critical role that global connectivity has for us, all of us, all over the world, particularly here from Georgia and Atlanta. And we have people joining us today from Singapore, from Tel Aviv, from Dubai, from Canada, you name it. So it's really exciting. And the Pendleton Group, we're a group of professionals in the economic development field work. And we work very closely with communities and organizations, companies to develop and deploy business and economic development strategy and connecting them with global connections. Guy Tesler, like I mentioned, is here with us, and we both specialize with this growth of foreign companies that call Atlanta and Georgia home, with domestic companies reaching out foreign markets, and also for FDI companies entering the U.S. market. So just for your information, please learn more about the Pendleton Group at pendletоnatlanta.com. And again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to our conversations.
Thanks, Jorge. And if I didn't mention, I'm Trevor Williams with Global Atlanta. If you want to asking so many questions, it's because we're a news service and I'm a journalist. So that's why I've been tapped to join this conversation. And we are recording, so if y'all say anything you don't want publicized, let us know, and we'll have to edit that from the video that we will publish later on. But I'm going to come back to our speakers because we're going to launch into the conversation from after the introductions, but first I'll just ask everybody if you'll introduce yourself very briefly, just say your name and your company or organization. And if you're outside the US or outside of Georgia, maybe say where you're calling in from. But I'll call on you if you can do that. Just keep it very succinct so we don't spend too much time on the introduction. But Jeff, why don't you go ahead and start?
Good morning, everyone, or good evening, or good afternoon. Jeff and I am with GPA Powers in Atlanta. We're a 90-year-old freight forwarder and customs broker, and I've been long involved with the District Export Council here in Atlanta as well. Look forward to the conversation.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. Luis? Oh, you're muted, Luis.
You're muted, Luis.
Yes, good morning, and good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this great event. I'm Luis Gomez. I work in IDOM as IT Consulting Director. I'm currently based on Dubai, and I am actively involved in some projects related with smart cities, smart mobility, and smart government. And yes, it's really a pleasure to be with all of you.
Good, thanks. So we got Dubai represented. Steve, where are you today? You're here in Atlanta, I think.
I am in Atlanta, Steve Mull with Locator X, and we're a technology company focused on location tracking, consumer engagement, and product authentication.
Great, thanks. Brandon?
Brandon Branham, Assistant City Manager and Chief Technology Officer for the City of Peachtree Corners.
Perfect. See?
Hello everyone, I'm C. I'm from Global Atlanta and I'm also a student from at Georgia Tech. Actually, the topic today is really close to me because I'm under the surveillance testing on campus. You know, there is an increase of positive cases on campus for now. So look forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Thanks, C. John?
I'm John Parkerson. I'm an international business attorney at Hall Booth Smith in Atlanta, and also the Honorary Consul General of Hungary.
Lan?
Wonderful. This is Lan Jenson. I am the CEO of a grassroots nonprofit, Adaptable Security Corp, and also co-chair the NIST-led initiative that's called Smart Secure Cities and Communities Challenge. So today it's wonderful to be with like-minded people.
Great, thank you. Brian?
I'm Brian Johnson. I'm the city manager at Peachtree Corners, Georgia, and also a member of the board of directors of Curiosity Lab.
Great. Michael? Oh, can't hear you, Michael. Doesn't look like you're muted, so I don't know if there's something going on with the audio.
Sorry. My name is Michael Pia.
Oh, we got Michael Pia. Okay, we got two Michaels. Sorry, Michael Tyson. Michael Tyson Jones. Go ahead. Sorry.
So yeah, I'm the director for global business development at the Metro Atlanta Chamber.
Got it. And the other Michael, why don't you go ahead and go once you finish sipping your water there. We hope it's water.
Hi, everybody. It's water. This hour is water. Later we change to gin. My name is Michael Pia. I'm representing Peachtree Corners City in Israel. That's what I do.
Great.
Happy to be
here. And Bern?
Yeah, I'm Bern Grush. I'm here in Toronto, Ontario. I'm with a company called Harmonized Mobility. We have two projects. One is the integration of transit with transportation service provision companies, in other words, private companies. And the second project, very important for this work, is I'm a project leader of an ISO standard for managing sidewalk and curbs for automated vehicles. In other words, the sidewalk drones and robo-taxis and so on that will be on connected networks and will have a lot of privacy and security concerns and a lot of sort of management, flow management concerns as well. That's probably the more important of the two projects for this conversation.
Definitely.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Ani?
Yeah, hi, my name is Ani. I'm co-founder and CEO of Marshall Automation and managing partner of USIBRC, specializing in India and USA consulting.
Thank you. Lucia?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lucia Jennings, President and CEO of the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce of the Southeast. I'm delighted to be here today. I wanted to learn more about what the panelists have to say about smart cities, surveillance, and security, so I can better advise my members.
Great. Prabhu?
I'm Prabhu Hariharan. I'm the Canadian Consul and Trade Commissioner in charge of foreign direct investment. I'm a career diplomat. And I was glad to bring Bernie Grush here to speak on behalf of Canada for harmonized mobility.
Great, perfect. Maria, can you hear us? Not sure if she can. Oh, yes.
Yes, I can. I will temporarily turn on my video. My internet connection is a little overloaded. I'm Maria Boyd-Deeb. I'm founder and president of T&M Associates. We are a technical and marketing consulting firm and have developed an economic development model using the procurement system of extractive industry. It's been applied very, very successfully 3 times, once for BP in Azerbaijan, once in Saudi Arabia, and in Abu Dhabi.
Great, thank you. And Kerry?
Hey everybody, Kerry Barnett with the U.S. Commercial Service here in Atlanta. Thank you.
Thanks. And Kimberly, if you can hear us, I'm not sure.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Kimberly Schulman. I'm the Trade Commissioner at the Swiss Business Hub at the Swiss Consulate in Atlanta, working to help bring Swiss exporting companies to the U.S. market.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, so that's as far as I know, we've gotten through everyone who's participated so far, except our featured speakers today. And I will start with them, and I'll just have them introduce themselves and maybe tell a little bit about what they hope to speak about. But then we'll launch into the full-on conversation. We have a very international group today. We have Chris Church from Interpol in Singapore. Chris, tell us about what you do.
Hello everyone. Hello from Singapore. It's a nice night here in Singapore. My role is a forensic analyst. So I'm charged with helping 194 countries understand digital forensics, but also that's also led me to look into smart cities and also motor vehicles and drones. So my main area of expertise at this moment in time is drones and motor vehicles and the road to autonomy and how that's going to affect the law enforcement and how they're going to enforce and investigate crime in the future. So luckily I'm in a smart city of Singapore and I have lots of experience around how to implement properly and how not to implement. And we're facing the same struggles in law enforcement. For example, the use of AI. I had a discussion today around deep fakes. And in law enforcement, we're not allowed to use the word deep fake. We have to call it audio or video forensics because deep fakes has a political connotation. So we've been banned from using deep fakes as a word in law enforcement at this moment in time. So you can see how complex law enforcement can get on a very simple issue, and hopefully during this conversation you'll start to understand more around the complexities of trying to do global technology innovation within the law enforcement realm.
Definitely. Avi Degani is from IP Gallery. Avi, can you introduce the company for us?
Yes, I'm with IP Gallery. IP Gallery is an American company headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. We maintain a wholly owned subsidiary in Israel, so I'm calling now from Tel Aviv. And for the last 5 years or so, we developed holistic smart city solutions, focusing mainly on real-time or enable cities to run the day-to-day challenges. Up until a couple of months ago, challenges, we thought that they are very challenging until the COVID came. And now we face, and the cities face the real challenge And instead of planning, now cities need to respond and respond very, very fast because of the nature of the COVID, because of the outbreak, because of the fast spreading. Because of the fast spread of the virus, and because different communities suffer or can or have the means to cope with the virus differently in terms of transportation and so on. So we are now, it's kind of resiliency, but it's kind of dynamic resiliency, providing or developing solutions that enable city to better cope in this uncertainty, those uncertainty days.
Definitely. And then we also have Justin Daniel from Baker Donaldson here in Atlanta. So we've got Singapore, Israel, and now Atlanta. Justin, tell us a little bit about what you do here in Atlanta.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Trevor. My name is Justin Daniels. I am a subject matter expert in things relating to cybersecurity and privacy, and I'm also a business attorney. So I have worked significantly with companies to help them create their security plans, manage them, handle data breaches, and I have some expertise in these issues and how they pertain to smart city implementations of technology. Great to be here with you.
Thank you, Justin. I guess we'll just start there. Justin, you know, that we're looking at in this forum at the kind of interplay between surveillance, security, and innovation, right? And it seems like there's, you know, there are obviously great benefits to instituting new technologies that can improve, you know, the flow of traffic, for instance, or law enforcement capabilities and things like that, surveillance, accountability. But there's a fine line between those innovations and the privacy or surveillance concerns that seem to be cropping up more and more each day. So where do you see kind of the state of affairs in the sort of smart city realm with regard to awareness of how to implement these things without running afoul of local laws and you know, issues with public sentiment, I guess?
I think to kick off our conversation for all of our guests is it's an age-old problem, and that's this. It's building cybersecurity and privacy into the DNA of the design and the implementation of technology. What we are seeing time and time again, we're all on a Zoom call. Their stock went up $130 yesterday, but they've had some privacy and security issues, but it hasn't impacted because everybody wants the convenience of technology. Security and privacy are many times an afterthought, and the smart city implementation of technology is no different. So what we've seen in some communities like San Diego, who's been grappling with some smart technology issues where law enforcement and surveillance has come up with cameras or sharing of data with third-party vendors. These are instances where you are seeing yet again, it's let's get this thing implemented. We know the technology is coming. That's not going to stop. It's really a recognition of how do we build privacy and security by design, either into the technology or build principles on how we're going to implement it.
Yeah. Do you feel like cities and communities or governments are more apt to do things with, like, to move ahead without the proper preparations in place, or vice versa? Do you feel like they are maybe paralyzed by worries about liability and therefore not as quick to bring these new technologies into force?
I think for a lot of governments, they face an even tougher challenge than companies, but the result is the same, where you're going to implement technology and worry about privacy and security later, because a lot of it comes down to budget. So how do you figure out how you're going to budget for dealing with these additional privacy and security issues, which aren't really a one-time spend? I've got my technology, I've got a solution, we're done. As you know, and I'm sure as our panelists and guests will discuss, we're talking about artificial intelligence, blockchain, drones. All of these new technology presents new issues for cybersecurity and privacy that you have to think about, which means spending time, resources, and money, which isn't a silver bullet solution. So the net result is, where do you find the funds and put in the extra time to do that on the front end, as opposed to reacting on the back end? I mean, it's just what was mentioned earlier about COVID. Now you've got a situation, you've got to react. You haven't had the time to plan, even though we've read things in the past, or how are we going to react if we have some kind of pandemic and people don't think much about it until now it's here and we've got to react. I think that's just human nature, and this particular issue is part of that. But when we have all of this interconnectedness with technology, the consequences not only can be far reaching, but they happen so fast.
Mm-hmm. Well, give us an example. I mean, I think it would be helpful. Maybe I'm more ignorant than everybody else on this call, but give us some examples of smart city technologies that may present some of these challenges. I think it's good to kind of give us a physical idea of what we're talking about here when we talk about smart cities, because the topic can get so nebulous very quickly.
Okay, well, for the group, let's talk about two. Let's talk about autonomous vehicles and drones. So if you're going to have an autonomous vehicle in a right of way next to people potentially on sidewalks we heard about or whatnot, what are you building into the autonomous vehicle so that there's security, so that one, if someone tries to hack in and take control of the vehicle, that's one issue. But the other issue is, what do we all think about how AI might need to be regulated? Because what if that autonomous vehicle hits a bump in the road? How does it programming work? Does it maybe swerve to the right and only hurt a couple people who are walking? Or does it swerve to the left, which protects the people, but there's a car next to it? Do we want to leave that to corporations or the designer of the artificial intelligence to, address that? Or do we need to put some regulatory guardrails or compliance around how that's going to be vetted? We really haven't had a public debate about that. You can go get a Tesla and some of these other things and they can self-park, but really the company has designed that AI and they've had to think through how they want to react in one situation or another. And we really haven't had any public debate, and particularly with smart cities, that impacts health, welfare, and safety of citizens.
Definitely. Yeah. So Chris, I might bring you in on that point, since you've studied how this works with drones in particular, and you're trying to herd 94 countries into the same framework. So, I mean, is it just maddening at this point in trying to get a standard, or are countries pretty amenable to trying to figure these things out on an international basis?
I think trying to get an international standard is probably not going to work, but getting a regional standard would probably be more achievable in the short time that we have in innovation and in technology. Because at the moment, so an example is in drones. So everyone pretty much copied the FAA guidance in America, and they just tweaked it a little bit to make it so it wasn't so US centric. But then India went one step further, and they've also put some measures in around the cyber intrusions into drones to make sure that the drones are not going to be intruded by cyber attacks and stuff like that. So I think cyber is starting to become more of an issue, but the problem is it's one of those things that people can't smell, they can't see, they can't witness. So they always think it's going to happen to someone else. Yeah. And it's always very difficult to tell people, you could be a victim of cyber attack if someone sends you a demand from Nigeria to say you've won a lottery, 10 million, please send me $100. Because the problem law enforcement faces, cybercrime is not localized. And as soon as you go out of a local vicinity, it becomes very complex, because you then have to have at least 2 police departments working on it. You have to get the court orders in both jurisdictions to work on the cyber investigation. And then if the suspect who's doing whatever they're doing is located in another country, that's even more problematic. And the cyber criminals are very quick to learn the Achilles heel of any legislation or any law. So when you talk about motor vehicles, one of the biggest problems in the UK at the moment is the key fob hacking problem. And it's a very simple $50 solution where you just get a amplifier to amplify the signal. You hold it up to the front door of a house where a BMW is parked. That amplifies the signal, that opens the car, they drive the car away. And then they take it somewhere, they reprogram the key, and they have a new BMW of £50,000, which they can drive around or sell on or break it up into parts or sell abroad. And even having a simple discussion with the motor manufacturers around that problem took 3 years, and we worked out there wasn't really a solution. And you have to wait for the 10 to 15 year cycle of the motor vehicle to go through before they solve the problem. And they solved the problem by putting a motion sensor in the key fob, so if it sits still for 10 minutes, it goes to sleep until it's moved again. And that's not really cybersecurity, that's just basic.
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem you have with smart cities is most of the interesting technology being implemented in smart cities is delivered by startups. And the problem is startups aren't really concerned around cybersecurity. They see it as an extra layer at some point in the future when their technology gets adopted by a major player, or they get brought out by a venture capital firm and they can then pay the money to then build the cyber layer on later. But the problem is if you build the cyber layer on later, you create chinks in the armor for enable the hacker or someone to get underneath and do whatever they need to do very quickly. And criminals are a lot quicker to look at these problems than anyone else. So you have to be very careful. I think that's where we stand. And obviously 194 countries have different levels of cyber and smart city knowledge and know-how. And so that's also a very interesting balancing act to get that correct, and that we're not alienating some of our member countries in going too far into talking about artificial intelligence and stuff like that. So it's a very complex field talking around these technologies in law enforcement, because at some point this technology will be used in a crime, and then you'll have to get that information from that technology to then use in a court of law to then prosecute someone. And to be honest, when you're talking about smart city, there's so many complex layers within a smart city that I think police are only touching 1/10 of data that may be available to them in an investigation. I think that's a good intro from me.
Definitely. So Avi, tell me about what that looks like from your end when you're helping the city or the community with an implementation. I mean, are they thinking about these things correctly? Are they trying to layer in security early on, or are you mostly doing adaptation on the back end when people realize that they have a vulnerability?
So first of all, the vulnerability is not only for cities, it's any IoT device, any device that is connected to the network. It can be your home devices, like the fridge, it can be your car, it can be your private camera. And there are a lot of cameras that are out there protecting businesses, enterprises, and so on. So the smart city takes it to a higher level of risk. But I think that if I take San Diego, and I add to what Justin just mentioned, San Diego invested like $30 million in planting cameras. I think it was 3,600 cameras planted by AT&T and GE. And the notion was, it was not about the video, it was about the analytics of the video. And the notion was that the camera is the ultimate sensor. And by analyzing the video, we could get data about parking availability, traffic loads, pedestrian crossing the street, and then alerting driver and saving lives of people. And then the state of California came with Privacy Act #1, and cameras are not allowed anymore in order to collect data. So there's some confusion. They took it to the extreme. And I think that making cities smart, and you already have the connectivity there, and you already have the cameras there, this data, and I mean the data, the metadata, not the video, not the visualized data, could be used in order to improve the services that the city provides. And this is now very, very important because of the virus, of the corona, the outbreak, the spreading, and the more data you have, the more you can plan for the benefit of the citizen. So it's important to realize the number of buses. It's important to realize how many people and who are the people that are using their private cars, who are the people that are using transportation, because you want to make sure the transportation is safe. You want to encourage people, or people are more using bikes, scooters, rather than using public transportation. But then you get to the issue of the communities and those people that are not owning their own car and they are dependent on public transportation. If you look at New York City, for instance, I think a lot of the casualties from the corona were drivers, the public transportation drivers, and people with low income that they were using and they had no other option but to use the public transportation. So I think in general, collecting data now is more important than privacy, just for the period of time that the states and the cities and the different transportation operators can gather enough data in order to plan accordingly to respond to the different outbreaks and actually build a plan. Like you mentioned at the beginning, it looks like nobody knows, but it looks like that this virus is going to be with us for a long period of time. And the more we'll be able to react or to respond, the more we'll be ready to fastly respond to an outbreak and to a different nature, a different community. And if it's in school, if it's only with those people who are using the public transportation, this data is crucial in order to fight and to mitigate the corona. So I think that the privacy in these days, or the protection of people look on cyber attack, they look at different phenomena or dangers, while we have now some virus, some pandemic that we need to fight, and this is the urgent. This should be the first priority. This is my humble opinion.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. Maybe Justin, if you want to comment on this, it seems like there could be, there's the threat level seems raised because obviously everybody's going to remote work, and they're again, like Avi's talking about, cities to, scramble to make sure that they're collecting the right data and all these things. So there's more vulnerability out there, but it also seems like there's this need to kind of implement and push for adoption of new technologies because of the threats. So do you find that the conversation is being moved forward more by COVID-19, or is it kind of causing people to sit back and wait more on the implementation of new cybersecurity protections, I guess?
I think that conversation is pretty selective. Avi mentioned we're trying to figure out how to deal with COVID, but like any other kind of crisis, a vacuum is created and things move into it. So then the question becomes, if we collect all these data, like in San Diego with the cameras or elsewhere, well, what happens when the crisis passes? Do we go back to the way things were, or is now the line shifted in a very fundamental way that has longer term consequences that we haven't really considered? I mean, think of the financial crisis when they eased the lending requirements, when they changed the model of how the housing market would work. All of these little incremental changes that people just didn't think much about ended up with the 2008 financial crisis. And now we're in a situation where the COVID is front and center, and we're trying to figure out how to deal with it. But on the back end, what does that mean going forward when it comes to privacy and security? Because I think most people in the general public, we value the convenience of technology beyond privacy and security. And I'm speaking just of the United States. As you know, we have no overarching privacy or security law. It's really a patchwork of laws. And for the most part in this sector, absent kind of law and regulation, most companies are not going to pay attention because cyber and privacy really don't drive the bottom line. It's a cost. And, Chris alluded to that with startups. So that's the challenge we face. And I think if we don't have this public debate and discuss the questions, we're going to look back on this period and see this was what led us down the path that got us to privacy rights and cyber issues that we deal with later that are significant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think just from an international relations perspective or a governance perspective, we're probably more apt to relinquish power and authority during a time of emergency. And we've even seen here in Georgia, like the state of emergency being extended, which, is okay to deal with the crisis. But again, like you said earlier offline, I think what if governments like that a little bit too much and are not willing to relinquish the newfound powers that they've gotten? I think you've seen that in some other worries about that in some other countries, at least. Chris, do you
If I
feel like the
can I add another
sure.
point?
Yeah.
We talk about government, and of course, government states, they need now to look and plan on how to protect the privacy and how to protect against cyber attack. It's not that we can forget about it, but what we see talking with the stakeholders, they don't think their job. They think their fields, their private fields. They have kids, they send kids to school, they send them via the yellow buses. So this is something, this fear now is more, it's not tangible, but this is something that everybody senses. And most of the time, the personal fear takes over the responsibility as stakeholders in the government. And that's why it gets, people tend now to overlook or to postpone a little bit the discussions about the privacy. They care about the kids, they care about the parents. And because of this, until we will know better what is the situation, either there will be vaccines or the, I don't know, the virus will vanish. Until then, people will walk out of fear. So there is the fear of privacy, fear of cyber attack, but the every day or every hour or every minute fear of the corona takes over for this time.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, I wanted to talk to you about just how the threat environment might have changed, or, you know, how are criminals potentially thinking differently, you know, maybe to take advantage of some of this fear or some of the additional connectivity that's been kind of brought online, like with remote work and everything. Do you see a fundamental shift in the way they're looking at things, and how does a city or government, I mean, how do you start with security with knowing that you're going to keep having to adapt this as the threats evolve?
Well, criminals, when COVID first hit, they were struggling as to how to keep their business operating model working, because obviously they're used to, you know, intimidation and taking money, physical money from people, or physical robberies and physical assaults. But as soon as COVID happened, everyone went into lockdown. They didn't have that avenue for intimidation or to extort money or whatever. So they all resorted to online stuff. I mean, even the mafia in Italy decided to set up a string of funeral homes because they realized that the funeral business would be quite high for during COVID. So they set up a whole network of funeral homes which they could then wash money through and launder money through, and it happened in Australia and stuff like that as well. So the criminals adapt a lot quicker to situational change than any other business, and even law enforcement. I mean, law enforcement adapting to working in COVID was a very painful process for a lot of countries, because obviously, I mean, an instance was a lot of countries rushed out and brought drones to then, you know, monitor people and do public service announcements. But for example, in France, the French government made an edict which banned police from using drones in France because it created negative publicity for the law enforcement agencies within France, because the media were reporting what an inconvenience it is having a drone blasting a message at 100 decibels. So a lot of the law enforcement had to stop their drone programs, and they will be stopped for at least 6 to 12 months until COVID goes away. But the criminals don't stop. They're constantly evolving. And to be honest, it's probably COVID has helped the criminal adapt to cyber crime a lot quicker than anyone else. And I saw a report in UK, I think it was, where they said they believe that 96% of cyber crimes go unreported because the response by law enforcement is very minimal. Because if I get money extorted from my bank account, and if I'm in UK, I ring the police, I log a report, and then the police don't do anything with that report. I ring the bank, they give me my money back. So it hasn't affected me too badly, so why am I going to worry about it? And this is a constant problem. Criminals adapt so quickly to changing environments, and the reason for that is because they use the internet, they do their research, and everyone, you know, when people ask me, where do you learn your criminal practices? the easiest place is YouTube. You look on YouTube and you type any criminal act, like hacking, Wi-Fi, and all that, and there's loads of videos that come out which will train you and tell you what bits you need to buy, where you buy them from, to be able to perpetrate that crime. And cybercrime, in some respects, is seen as a victimless crime, but it's not, because we do a lot of work in cybercrime in Interpol. We also look at like sextortion, business email compromise, and that is exploding during COVID. That hasn't quietened down. That's got worse, 10, 15 times worse. And I don't think it's going to get any better. And cyber is a very difficult space to police, because as I said before, if you, let's say you fall victim to a cyber attack and that cyber criminal is based, I don't know, say even in Canada, then that investigation then has to then contact the Canadian authorities to seek permission to investigate that crime, find the perpetrator within the Canadian borders, and then if necessary go and arrest them, and then you then have to deport, move them from Canada into America so they can stand trial. That's a very lengthy process. And that's why, countries in the emerging world, such as, let's say Nigeria, is very renowned for its cybercrime, because it is a massive industry in those areas. An example of cybercrime investigation I was involved in was in sextortion, where they were sextorting people across Facebook. And the Philippines was a major contributor to that crime. So we went to the Philippines, we shut down 5 criminal networks doing that crime, but within 2 days, those networks were back up and running. So these networks are a lot more resilient than people understand, and the knowledge is shared very quickly. If someone finds a vulnerability in a device, you can guarantee within 10 minutes that vulnerability being found. If the company who owns that device doesn't do a bug bounty, then they share that information on the internet, on a forum, or on a software development site. And then people will start to exploit that and find how to, commit a crime using that technology. And also, most people seem to think cybercrime happens to the person next door, not to them. And I think there's a mindset that has to change. But how do we solve it? Is $1 million question, but I think it's more about governments and local agencies banding together and collaborating to try and solve the problem. Also, a harmonization of legislation to help try and solve that problem. So instead of have 50 different laws around cybercrime, have 5 or even 10, because at the end of the day, it affects everyone across the globe. And I know there's a lot of work around this, but it's a very difficult task. And even the ability for police to investigate a cybercrime is quite complex. And I know we've dealt with countries who, have a notorious cyber criminal in their country, and you contact that country and they go, and what do you want me to do? We say, well, can you arrest them? Well, they haven't committed a crime in our country, so as long as they attack countries around us and not inside our borders, we won't arrest them. And, a lot of the major countries are like that. As long as the cyber criminal doesn't attack any of their people or any of their institutions, they're happy for that cyber criminal to carry on as usual. And I think the mindset has to change.
Yeah, it's not just the vulnerability of the network, it's the vulnerability of the legislation too that's a target, it sounds like. Justin and Avi, I'm going to ask y'all one more question, then open it up. I mean, it's already been open, but if y'all want to ask questions to the panelists or make a comment, if any of you want to speak, please let us know. Just either chat at me or just raise your hand. I may be able to see you. And Jorge, did you want to say something? You're muted right now. Sorry.
I'm curious within the conversation. I'm curious what both perhaps Bern and Luis, if they have seen any of this thing. In your case, Canada, and Luis, you have major presence in smart cities all over the world. So, have you been engaged with any of these issues that we're talking about here? The same thing with you, Bern?
Yes, Bern, go ahead and start. Yeah.
So I am not a cybersecurity expert at all, and I have not aware of issues in Canada. So I cannot answer your question directly. But what I do want to interject is that there is a new technology that's probably going to become dominant sooner than either robo-taxis or even on a pervasive basis, drones, aerial drones, and that is sidewalk drones, which is a simpler, quicker, easier, smaller, and it's coming, I think, completely under the radar of all of these issues and the kinds of collaborative crimes that I can imagine. I'm not a criminal mind, but I can imagine all kinds of possibilities with these small devices, which are inexpensive, easily wasted. You can put out you could put out 30 or 40 of them with only 1 or 2 of them being active actors and all the rest being decoys, for example. You could crowd out a street. The kinds of things you can do with those technologies is stunning. And it's, I think, I haven't seen anybody dealing with it. I'm writing a paper about it now, but it's not an academic paper. I wouldn't mind some help, Chris, from you, for example, because this is nearer and less understood and less appreciated, and it's all startups. I know FedEx and DHL are working on these drones, but all these drones now are mostly from startups. They are not at all concerned about these cyber issues that you are aware of. And I think that's an immediate, sooner, bigger, uglier problem than these ones that are already big and ugly that you're talking about.
It's a great point, Bert. Thanks.
Thank you.
Luis, did you want to add anything about how ADOM is seeing this in your implementations around the world?
Yeah, what I can share with you, for instance, in Spain, most of the smart city initiatives are led by the one specific agency within the Ministry of Energy. And they are now, for instance, floating some, maybe it's a little bit different than in the USA, but this ministry is floating like 60 million euros in projects related with smart cities. And what they have done is basically, it's not a kind of regulation, but they are forcing all the companies to follow some specific standards, some specific guidelines in terms of cybersecurity. So at least they are sure that all the companies comply with a minimum requirements in terms of cybersecurity measures. So, I mean, this is the most relevant aspect here in Spain regarding this cybersecurity issues. Yeah.
Good, good. Well, the thing I was going to ask, and again, if y'all have questions, please jump in. But it seems to me that we're talking about startups being such an important force here and driving these things forward. It seems to me that security, baking in security to your solution as a startup would become a competitive advantage at some point and make it easier for you to get acquired or easier for you to make your case that you should be part of this conversation. See that becoming more integrated into the conversation from the startup scenario. From Justin and Avi, do y'all see that playing out?
I guess the best example, oh, go ahead, Avi.
So what we see is not about the protection, but we are requested to have a specific insurance against cyber attack. So if in the past the insurance was only about malfunction of the system or not being able to deliver, now the insurance, one of the insurances that are requested is cyber attack insurance. So everybody is covered. We throw it to the insurance company.
So
all of us.
So Trevor, without getting into a long discussion about cyber insurance, my view of cyber insurance, it's a tool in your toolbox. It transfers risks, but it really isn't a substitute for how you build the product. I had a client get phished, $500,000 wire fraud. Then they read their policy and found out they were covered to the tune of $100,000. Didn't realize it because the policies are all over the place. But the real thing is, and to me, Zoom is the latest example, security and privacy are an afterthought because you have to bootstrap yourself to get a minimum viable product and to get customers. And cyber and privacy, until you start having an impact on how you get customers, meaning the customer says, hey, I don't want to look at your product until you show me the security, they might adapt to the customer requiring that. And then I go back to, is the customer going to start requiring it because we've put some type of regulatory or other regime where people are influenced or incentivized to start asking those questions. We have some of that in the enterprise market, but I would suggest to you when it comes to startups, that's what it will take.
Yeah,
yeah,
Steve,
I agree. I agree. It's not about the insurance is not a substitute, but at this phase when the regulation is not very well defined and not all the devices are protected and the network is not fully protected, this is kind of being covered for the short period of time.
Yeah, I think Steve wanted to interject something. Steve, or ask a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, as a startup technology firm and having been in the industry for a long time, I buy into what Chris was saying around privacy and security have to be intentional and by design. And the notion, there's two areas, right? One is the data security itself and the encryption and the protection of that. But it's also the usage of the data. And, you know, the market is rife with technology firms that create what's called digital exhaust, right? Where the data about the people using the technology becomes the product. And so we've taken a very intentional and purposeful protection there that the data belongs to the client. And if any of the technologies you're looking at don't manage their data that way, that's a huge risk.
Definitely, definitely. We've got one question from Jeff typed in about, you know, are the tech companies going to be liable for the criminal activity on their networks? You know, Chris, you mentioned YouTube, like the fact that you can just go learn about anything on YouTube, and that's a fine line, right? Like you can't clamp down on legitimate content while you're trying to, you know, enforce incitement to crime, right? So, and I would imagine the laws differ in each place. So do you ever envision a time when there's a shift in liability towards the platforms? It seems like the Trump administration has tried to do that when it comes to speech on technology platforms, but it may be too technical of a question, but if anybody wants to jump at that, please go for it.
So Trevor, when it comes to the United States, you're talking about one paragraph in the Telecommunications Act of 1996 that's had far-reaching impact that at the time it was passed, that provision was kind of an afterthought. So for everybody, there's one clause in a federal law that basically says that the platform, say Facebook, Google, whatever, they are not legally responsible for what happens or criminal acts or whatnot that might be weaponized through their platform. And so that's where you're getting into the public debate, because let's be honest, in 1996, when that law was passed, that was before we had the iPhone, the Android, Facebook, Twitter. And the other thing that we're struggling with is the rate of innovation and change has now far outstripped not only our capacity to really understand its longer term implications, but even any democratic process, which is typically fairly slow moving. You have a debate, and we all know in our country, at least, our Congress and, you know, we're at partisan loggerheads. So now you inject that into it, and that's one of the big reasons you don't have a federal law. If any of your companies had a breach in the United States tomorrow, guess how many laws you have to comply with for breach notification? 52, and I'm including Puerto Rico and Guam. So think of that type of system and how regulation can stifle innovation, even though if it's done in a better way, it might help companies put this stuff into their DNA. But I'm speaking from a United States perspective. I'd love to hear our Canadian, Singapore, Israeli, because if you go to the European Union and other places, they view privacy and these things very differently than we do in the United States.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful. Jorge, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm curious. This is I think she just left us. It was no, she's there. Hey, Lan, your organization deals with accreditation on this type of issues. What are your thoughts on all this? When Justin and I had a conversation with you, you were talking about the accreditations to cities and how they can be evangelizing, if you will, about what we're talking about. Any comments on that from that perspective?
Thank you, Jorge. Indeed, it is right now a jungle. A lot of cities and counties have the ambitions to do the best by their cities, counties, and their people. But like Justin mentioned, the laws are multitudes of them, and in practice, it is hard. And so under NIST leadership, there is this initiative called Smart Secure Cities and Communities Challenge. And a lot of these leaders in this space for the past 6 years are now thinking of making it easier so that the local governments, they are going to be the leaders in all of this. So if they have an easier way to check off, say, hey, well, not check off and then they're all set, but rather a pragmatic way of doing things. And then after they get it all done, started in strategic planning, first of all, and then meeting their cities and counties' needs and implement a holistic approach, kind of using your example in Curiosity Lab is a wonderful example in that you're able to showcase that it can be done. A lot of people think it can't be done realistically within time and also within budget. But you have seen it, and we're going to hopefully showcase your example at the upcoming public debate conference in this October. It's virtual, so that more people can be inspired. And then as a follow through, the third part is that these cities and counties that have done it successfully with the help of these leaders then can also have a third party consulting organization to validate that indeed they have done it. And then they are going to look into it annually or however the frequency suits their needs. It's going to be risk-based approach, right? And so by doing that, hopefully we start to take a step in the right direction. Rather than everyone still discussing, it's great discussing, but it's quite too much a jungle. We need to combine our efforts together and make things happen and showcase through doing. So thank you, Jorge and Justin, for doing it with the city of Peachtree Corners as a first case.
And I think that might be a good segue to bring in Brandon. I don't know, Brandon, if you want to talk about just what you've seen from the Peachtree Corners perspective with companies that are testing these technologies. I think y'all have sort of a dedicated server or something that enables security during the testing process, particularly with regard to autonomous vehicles. But if you talk about that, I'd be interested.
Yeah, we do. We have a 1.5 mile section of roadway for autonomous vehicle testing and have a 1 gig fiber optic system that runs along the roadway to allow for smart city IoT device testing, all pulled back to a central location, separated from the rest of the city's network so that we can, begin to perfect this data and privacy security. And with Justin and Jorge's help, we've been going through the process to be NIST 171 compliant. And what does that look like as you start adding in these, external devices from startup companies to established companies? What are the different security protocols we're seeing when we're working with Bosch or we're working with a startup out of their garage? And what can cities do, to protect their internal network when you're entering into an agreement with a startup who cybersecurity is just not the forefront of their mind, but you're still required to maintain and protect your data and your security network. So we're in the final processes of wrapping that up, and we'll have some more information to share.
Great. Well, we are at 12 o'clock. Thank you so much, Brandon. I think we're happy to wrap up here. Unless anybody else has some other questions, we can extend the conversation a bit. If anyone feels like they haven't been able to, interject what they'd like to, please speak now or forever hold your peace. I'm not seeing any hands being raised, so our speakers did a great job.
If I can say something.
Yeah, sure.
There was a cybersecurity week last year in Tel Aviv, and the keynote speaker was a guy that managed to hack into Elon Musk's private car. So because of this achievement, he was invited as the keynote speaker. And what he basically said that no, there are no systems that are protected, fully protected. Always there will be the guy that is capable in attacking. And the thing is that you need to detect very, very fast and mitigate. So it's about the combo. It's about protecting, detecting, and mitigating.
And I would think at some point, bringing it back to the international realm, there's going to be Israel, I'm sure, is one of the leaders in this, but it would seem that, the better a country is at enabling the protection of data and networks and things like that, the more investment and more activity they're going to see in this sector. So I imagine there will be hopefully some competitive regulation going on that eventually leads to a standard. Justin, I think you probably know about the shift in liability on the fintech side and how that changed the adaptation of certain like point of sale systems, for instance. Just that one shift, one tiny tweak of the law to put the liability on the person who's at fault really led to a lot of adoption of new technology. So hopefully we will see some of that in the smart city sector. But thank y'all. We're giving you a round of applause virtually. All of you, not just our featured speakers, but everybody. Jorge, do you want to wrap us up here? You're muted, sorry. Jorge, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Sorry again. This has been great. The purpose of this roundtable is precisely to have a conversation. And it's just the start of this relationship that we've built through this group. So we will continue to be in communications with all of you and see how we could extend this conversation. And this topic, Justin and I have been working on this for a number of years and trying to evangelize about the importance of cybersecurity and this intersection, particularly with smart cities, which everyone is involved in this room today. It's a fascinating topic that has a lot of crevices that could be explored. And I'm looking forward to continue the relationship with Bern, with Luis, with Lan, and with everybody on board in here to carry on this conversation to the next level and see how we could take this further.
And particular thanks to
Trevor, I would like to add that if anyone heard or met someone that's of interest and you don't know that person, please send me an email and I will make an introduction so you can continue the conversations in whatever direction you want to take it. You all have my emails because I've been mailing you all, so please send me a note and I will make that introduction.
Great, thanks, Guy. And particular thanks to everybody who joined us from places further afield. Chris, have a good night. Avi, you're probably getting into the evening as well. Luis, I can see it's dark behind you. So thank you all for taking your time and joining us. We really appreciate it. I think everyone's really enjoyed the conversation. So we'll talk to y'all soon. Stay tuned for the next one. Thanks. Bye.